Hello, today is November 14th, 2008. We're meeting today with Mr. Martin Lubow.
Lubow,
Thank you, at his home in Fort Collins, Colorado. My name is Brad Hoops. I'm the interviewer for the Northern Colorado Veterans History Project. Welcome, Martin, and thank you for participating in the project today. Let's start out, if we could, tell us a little bit about yourself, your date of birth, where you were born, a little bit about your family.
I was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania on May 27, 1923, which makes me 85 years old. My family were immigrants from Russia, and we lived in in the poor section of town that was about half immigrants and half African Americans would come up from the South to find jobs. And so all through my public school, about half of all the classes were African Americans, and the rest children of immigrants for the most part. So
was there a Russian community roughly where you grew up, or was it a mix of immigrants?
There was no Russian community, but there was a Jewish community, which my parents practiced that religion. So at any rate, that was the early years. I witnessed the Depression, and I remember I got 1 penny allowance per week, and the choice at the store was some sort of candy or pickle, and I used to get the pickle.
Is that right?
So then I went to an elementary school where there was one teacher who took an interest in me and encouraged me to write. And when I got to junior high school, I became the editor-in-chief of the monthly paper. And when I got to high school, I was the editor-in-chief of the weekly high school paper and also the valedictorian. Getting that a commencement speaker's job was based more on ability to speak than on the grades. Following my graduation, since I skipped a grade, I graduated in February from Shenley High School in Pittsburgh.
February of what year?
That would be February of 1941.
Okay.
And my mother had a relative in Baltimore, Maryland, who was the owner and operated a bed spring factory. She called him and asked him to employ me, and so I went to Baltimore for 6 months, and I worked there as a liaison between the factory and the office. You can put that down. So at that point, I knew I wanted to go to college, but I didn't have any money, and I was hoping for a scholarship. In the meantime, I earned $12 a week, and I saved about half of it, lived on cheese sandwiches, and sent the money home to start to build a fund to go to college.
Can you give us a general idea for us? I mean, 12 months or $12 doesn't sound like much.
No.
Was that a fair wage, or?
It was a going rate.
Okay.
But $12 then meant more than it does today. That's
okay.
Sure. At any rate, I then got a scholarship and enrolled at the University of Pittsburgh and pursued a degree in political science. Then came Pearl Harbor and the draft.
Do you remember where you were when you heard
Yeah,
Pearl Harbor been bombed?
I heard it on the radio, and I had never heard of Pearl Harbor before. Uh, and so, uh, in the summer, no, yeah, why I went to Pitt for a year and a half, and became an editorial writer on the daily Pitt News, and I was asked to by a man who was getting his doctorate in the School of Social Work at Pitt. I was asked if I would. He was going to be heading up a summer camp for poor children in Manhattan, New York, and he asked me if I would like to be a counselor there, and so I did go there. And one memorable incident is at one point I had gotten poison ivy in a rather delicate place. And there was a little infirmary there that I went to, and another kid who was about 2 years younger than I was, he was a kitchen boy, had exactly the same problem. We were next to each other, and so we talked about what we wanted to do in life. He had a lisp, and he said he wanted to be an actor. His name was Bernie Schwartz, and anyhow, he wanted to be an actor. And I thought to myself that, given the lisp so on, why he better have a day job ready. Well, a couple of years later, I saw him in the movies. He turned out to be Tony Curtis.
Really?
Yeah. And then, so I registered for the draft in Peekskill, New York, while I was a counselor there, because the system was that whenever your birthday, wherever you were, you could register. You registered there, and then I decided that I wanted to go into the aviation cadet program. Now, I had never had any mechanical experience. I had never been in an airplane. My family didn't own an automobile, and I'd only been passenger in an automobile for maybe 5 or 6 times. I had a poor sense of direction, no knowledge of physics, and had no damn business in the aviation cadet program, except for one thing. There was an actor whose name escapes me at the moment, who big, tall, handsome guy who was always played an American flyer, and wearing wings on his chest. And in the movies, he had remarkable success with the young ladies, and I wanted to emulate that as much as I could. And so I passed the physical easily. I was in good health, and I had to pass a mechanical aptitude test. Well, I knew nothing about mechanics, but I did know by that time how to do well in a multiple choice test, and so I squeezed by that one. Well, I eventually got to the Nashville, Tennessee testing station for aviation cadets. They put you through a series of tests to see if you're qualified to pick up this flying business quickly, which they couldn't take time to have you have an extensive program for you.
Now, would that have been before you'd gone into some sort of boot camp, or had you gone through any?
I'm glad you asked that. The boot camp was in Miami Beach, Florida, and for I forget how long, perhaps 2 months, we took a basic training. And then, and after basic training in the aviation cadet program, you went to one of the universities in the United States for the second phase. Well, there were 3 of us. That group that I trained with were all from Pittsburgh, or the area. And after basic training, everybody got orders to go out except 3 of us. And we found ourselves back into marching on the sand part of a golf course, and you couldn't get your drill master to answer any questions. He didn't care what your problem was. And so at my instigation, the three of us, one day when everybody did a right turn, we did a left turn. We hitchhiked into Miami, found the headquarters and the right person to talk to was a captain, and told him, here we are taking basic training for a second time. And so he sent the sergeant back to look, and they found that our files had slipped down behind the drawer.
Boy.
And so he said, I'm going to make it up to you. And the way he made it up, he didn't tell us what he was going to do. He sent the three of us to the University of Pittsburgh. That was our school, and I mean that was where we came from. And I had been working on the school paper before I went into the service on the 8th floor, and here the 8th floor had become the bedroom of the dormitories. So I was back home. There were at that point in my life I was very interested in young ladies, and there were no major camps around the Pittsburgh area. But the young men had all gone elsewhere, and so when our leave began, the exits and entrances to the university's main building, called the Cathedral of Learning, on Saturday, we got off for the weekend. Young women were waiting for these cadets. So, at any rate, I got a little flying instruction there, and then went to Nashville, Tennessee, where I proceeded to wash out of the program when these tests indicated that I was not the right kind of person for that program. So I was sent to Scottsfield, Illinois, to learn to be a radio operator, and after that, presumably to be a machine gunner. And so I went to I took the radio course, and was learning the International Morse code and practicing it. I had a hard time with the mechanics of radio and how it worked, but I got by that. And then one day while I'm in the barracks, there was a call for me to come to the office, and there was an officer from Washington D.C. who was somehow in an early form of computers. They didn't have the kind of computers we have now, but they had punch cards, and he had picked me out as somebody to offer an opportunity to volunteer for something. So he says, we would like you to join the program. That you'd be doing a great service for the United States. It would be hazardous duty, and would you be interested? And I said I would. One of the main reasons was I was one of 20,000 dog faces in that place, and I wanted to do something that distinguished me from the rest.
The dangerous, the description of the dangerous duty didn't bother you at all?
I took my shot at that, and I didn't know what this was. Well, it turned out to be, and I accepted. I volunteered. Mm-hmm. It was the Office of Strategic Services, or the OSS, and so I had all kinds of weird training for this, to train you to be a spy. Just for instance, because I could go on for a long time about that. At one point, I was asked to do a kind of an assembling of. There's a toy game where kids use pieces and build something. And my grandson did a lot of that. And one of the things that happens when you're 85 is you forget the names of things.
Yeah.
Tinker toys.
Okay.
Tinker toys. It comes along in a couple of minutes later.
Not a problem.
Anyhow, but these were Tinker Toys about 5 feet long instead of 6 inches, and to do it by yourself would have been almost impossible. So they provide you with assistant. So the assistant at a critical point would drop his end. Well, the shrinks were sitting behind the bushes, seeing how I react to the frustration. When we got to this one place, we all privately changed into fatigues, and we were instructed not to give our names, our real names. Each had a nickname. Our names, where we came from, anything about us, and we didn't know whether the next guy was an admiral or a civilian, or the women there, and so. Then, as you went through each of the series of tests, on the sheet they gave you, there were only 2 places where you're allowed to reveal your identity. And so one of the things they did was, we had a test where we were told. I was told that I was discovered in the Office of War Information. It was the American Propaganda Agency after hours, and I had 10 minutes to think up a cover story, and then I would face a board of questioners. So I did that, and after, I imagined myself a different age than I was, and they said, when's your birthday? They kept shooting questions at me, and finally, they conferred with each other and said, it's our duty to tell you that you failed this part of the test, but then you go to this other place, and that's your next stop. And there'd be a nice older lady who would say, I just want to find out how you feel about this test, and of course I didn't feel well about it because I was just told I had flunked it. And well, everybody gets told they flunked it. The real test is how much you reveal to this lady.
Oh, wow.
So I could go on for a long time with the different tests, but anyhow, we received all sorts of training in physical combat, and so I spoke a little German. I took 2 years in high school, and it was our understanding. There was nothing official about it that we would go over to England, and well before D-Day we would end up on the continent. Well, we went over to England. I spent 5 months there, and I was in London during the blackouts. I never experienced one of the German rockets exploding, but I was there when, and all I can say is that what thin veneer of morality exists in our civilization is practically lost during the blackouts. People act as their instincts drive them, rather than on some standard of conduct that's expected, because nobody can see you. And young women would be out there looking for the American soldiers to team up with.
Huh.
And that was the way of life there.
Yeah, yeah.
And anyhow, I spent 5 months in England. I became old enough and cast my first ballot in 1944 for Franklin Delano Roosevelt's 4th term, and by absentee ballot. And so then the order to go on to the continent never came, and instead I went to China. I was ordered to China. I didn't speak any Chinese. And the way we went to China was we went to California first. By coincidence, a place called Pittsburgh, California. We got on the boat, and the boat then did not cross over the Pacific because the Japanese controlled the Pacific. The boat went south and stopped to refuel in Melbourne, Australia, then went under Australia over to the western coast of India. It was what is now called Mumbai. It was Bombay then. And that was my first view of the third world. And the streets of Bombay were just crowded with people who were just barely dressed, some of whom would be squatting in a position much like a baseball catcher, and they would cook food there, and all they were full of beggars, some of whom had been deliberately crippled by their parents so that they could get people who were compassionate to give them some money so they could survive. And so we got on a train in Bombay and moved west to east across the northern part of India. It took 4 days and nights. The train would stop periodically. The train took 4 days and nights to cross from Bombay to Calcutta.
What were conditions like on that train?
Well, it was the first time I was introduced to a bathroom that consisted of a hole in the floor, and that was the one condition. The train kept stopping periodically, and we had what we called K rations, I believe, which had a cocoa or coffee, and then we go up and get water out of the steam engine of the train. And along the route, there would be people out there waving at us, and I remember one man singing, "It's a long way to Tipperary," with Indian accent in it. Tipperary came out as Tippalolly. Anyhow, so we got to Calcutta. From there, we flew over the Himalayan mountains, known as the Hump, and landed in Kunming, China.
And how was that flight? Because I've heard those flights could be pretty...
Flight.
Yeah, the flight
well,
over.
You're flying between mountains.
Yeah.
The mountains are too high to fly over. And so you didn't see much. It's clouds.
Jeez.
And now, I have to say that after this is, I left California in January of 1945, and after my whole experience in China, I was discharged at the Congressional Country Club in Washington, D.C. on December 23rd of 1945. So the year 1945 was involved in the trip over into India and then into China and then what I do there. So anyhow, I'm amazed at how much I have forgotten about the very ordinary aspects of living, but I remember some things. At any rate, from Kunming, China, we were then taken, I was flown, and my memory here gets a little hazy. There were 3 of us who became Team Reptile, and we were assigned. I operated the radio. We had a little suitcase that consisted of a transmitter, receiver, and power unit. And and we went out near the coast of China, and our assignment was to operate against two cities, Amoy, which is not called Amoy anymore, and Fuzhou, primarily Amoy. And what we did was work with Chinese intelligence people. This was all set up at the Cairo conference between Franklin Roosevelt and Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek, and the integration of American intelligence with Chinese intelligence. So obviously the three of us couldn't pass as Chinese, but we controlled the operation of, and we operated against Amoy. We did what they call black intelligence, dirty tricks against the Japanese. There were the people we were in touch with had people in the city who would feed us intelligence, and we lived in the rice paddies, a rather simple life.
No, I'm sorry to interrupt, but the coast is still controlled by the Japanese?
Well, the Japanese controlled the cities.
Okay.
Japanese are in control of Amoy and Fuzhou, and had been for
Right.
decades.
Right.
And so we did this everyday job, and I have very few memories about how we lived from day to day, but I have a few. And then one day I picked up a broadcast indicating that an atomic bomb had been dropped on Hiroshima. And now, one of the other two guys in our team, Jim, had studied Japanese culture and language at Cornell. And so when we sat around that evening and drank rice wine, and Jim suggested that the next day that we go into Amoy, even though the Japanese were in control. He thought that no Japanese would take it upon himself. We go in full uniform, and no Japanese would take it upon himself to stop us. Now, we had no military mission, and we had no business doing this. But after being a little concerned that they could come after us, and there would be nothing the three of us could do to stop them, so we did. We put on uniform, we strapped on 45s, and we got Amoy. The major part of Amoy is an island just and a small part is on the mainland, but it's just a short trip across a body of water. And so we got a fisherman to take us over to the island, and we started down the Amoy was a city with we would in the United States would all recognize as a modern city with roads and paved roads and so on. But at any rate, here the three of us started walking down the street, and the mothers would bring their little children out to see these white people, one of whom was blonde, and the kids fell in behind us, so we weren't exactly sneaking into town. And a truck went by with Japanese Marines on it, and they stood up in the truck and saluted us. And then a Japanese officer walked across he had a sword on, and he looked at us in a very hostile manner, but he just kept walking. And so we went to a restaurant recommended by our operatives, and it was on the second floor, and for each of us a young woman was provided to feed us and cater to us And anyhow, we'd spent about 5 hours there when we decided that we better get out of there. Enough time had gone by. For a moment there, we saw a we learned that there was going to be a Japanese non-commissioned officers dance, and there was some talk about going to it, but we decided not to. Anyhow, we got out of there, went back across, and accomplished absolutely nothing for the United States in that trip. It was just something that we did. So,
Well, let me interrupt you here a second. You said you got that radio message about the atomic bomb. Did you have any concept, any idea what the magnitude, the size of this thing, and what did they give an
It
explanation?
had a concept that it was something extraordinary, but the Japanese had not surrendered. There was no indication they were, and the city of Amoy didn't surrender till at least a month or two after we had been there.
Oh, jeez.
So anyhow,
Did you have any fear when you were walking through the city? I mean, what was your
my attitude was I shouldn't have had that rice wine the night before. I would not have agreed to this. But gradually we built up confidence because we weren't being bothered. At any rate, we came when. What I don't remember how we got from the coast back to Kunming. There were no roads really there, and so we had to have walked to some place and been picked up. But I cannot remember exactly how we got out of there. Oh, Jim Carr, the one of the three of us, said, "Why don't we get a fishing boat and go up to Shanghai and get a ride back to Kunming that way?" Well, those waters are full of pirates, and he got outvoted by Skip and me. And we said, "Look, we made it this far. Let's get the hell out of here." And so we did not go to Shanghai. And so anyhow, the trip back was by boat, but straight across this time. Took a lot less time, and we were put on board first, given special treatment. Nobody was told why, but we could see we were being treated specially, and we ended up at Fort Lewis, Washington State, and from there we flew to the Congressional Country Club and received our honorable discharges in time for Christmas, the 23rd of December. And then when I got to Fort Lewis, I called my parents and told them I was back, and told them when I would be back. And so when I got there, the front door was locked and they weren't there, and I was exceedingly unhappy, and I knocked down the door. So that was how I was received. Anyhow, I then moved into my own quarters and continued my education at the University of Pittsburgh.
Let me, if you don't mind, let's stop here. Let me back up and pepper you with some questions of your experience, and then we'll move on to
Sure.
To your post-military life. Being a boy from Pittsburgh, it sounded like you'd crossed the Atlantic to England, and then of course over to Asia. I've heard all sorts of stories about these crossings. How did you get your sea legs? How was your various trips on sea for you?
Well, the trip over to England, actually they landed in Scotland, I remember, and I saw Glasgow. It runs in my mind, we landed in something called the Firth of Clyde. It's a port town, apparently, and down into England. Well, we were concerned the Japanese submarines were there. We went on one of the Queens, and I don't remember anymore whether it was a Queen Elizabeth or Queen Mary, but it was a Queen. And I remember on board was Glenn Miller's band, but not Glenn Miller, and the actor Broderick Crawford was on board. Uh, and there were no, oh, yeah. We slept in hammocks. And then one night, I suddenly felt abdominal pains and had to rush to the bathroom, which was filled with the other guys who were having the same abdominal pains and a need for bathrooms. So it's something they had fed us.
Oh, wow.
Uh, that we were just crowded into it. There was none of the luxuries of the queens which were intended for the tourist trade. But I don't swim well, and not that it would make any difference, but the thought of the German submarines that were all over there was not a happy one. But
Did that play in your mind as you crossed over, or were you?
no,
Yeah.
you got interested in other things.
Yeah.
You talked to people.
Okay.
So, and I've described my time in England. I did a routine radio. I was in contact with OSS agent on the continent already, and we talked by radio and relayed messages. So to pick this up now, the war. I'd been discharged. I got back to the University of Pittsburgh. I pursued a major in political science. I then got a job teaching high school in a suburb of Pittsburgh, a rural mining section, Cecil Township High School. And while I was teaching there, I did a master's degree at the University of Pittsburgh in political science. And then, so I taught there and enjoyed it, but I was paid $2,000 a year gross. And even though that's more than 2,000 is today, it wasn't a lot. And I was commuting for a while, then I moved in nearby. Then in 1952, Scholastic magazines and the European Travel Commission announced an essay contest for educators throughout the United States. And it was the first contest I ever entered, and I won first prize.
A national contest.
National contest. And there was a second and third one. They said these are the three winners, but I got first choice as to which of three trips. So I know that I was considered first place, but they didn't announce it that way. They said these are the three winners.
Yeah, but still, three winners nationally is still something. Yeah, okay. Yeah.
But I was the first place because
Yeah.
there was a trip. There was a trip to Turkey and Greece and places like that. Another one in the north, and there was a trip England, France, Monaco, Belgium, 8 countries.
Mm-hmm.
And I picked the middle course. But at any rate, so I went over there during the summer for 8 weeks, and there was somebody to meet me in every country, and they showed me around. I was provided with all the expenses that I need. I had to borrow $100 from the father of a friend of mine back in Pittsburgh to have any money of my own. And then I came back from that experience and decided that kind of a secret ambition that I had to become a lawyer. And
what do you think of that trip prompted you to?
Well, it gave me the confidence that I could do it.
Okay.
And so, at that time, I'd become a teacher in the Pittsburgh school system, and I enrolled at Duquesne University Law School at night. And so, for the next 4 years, I would get up at 4 in the morning, study law school, teach classes at in social studies, occasionally English as well, and for those 4 years, after teaching, I got in my car and drove downtown, where the law school was, next to downtown, and we'd have classes, and it left very little time for anything else, and I had to do a lot of studying. So I got through that. I went on and became, I was admitted to the bar of Pennsylvania in 1957. I passed the bar exam on the first occasion. I had met the woman that I married, and
Well, where'd you find time for that?
well, I met her at a church social, a Unitarian church, and so she didn't want to start having a family until I passed the bar exam, and so that's when we started having a family, when I passed the bar exam, and so we had a son. Then there was a miscarriage, and then there was a daughter, and so I went on to practice law. I was assistant district attorney of Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, which is Pittsburgh area, for 2 years, and I was invited by an older attorney to join his labor relations practice, which I did, and for a number of years. And then I also was a labor arbitrator. That is, a labor arbitrator is somebody who is a judge in disputes between employers and unions. Often it's over whether there was a justifiable firing of somebody.
Okay. Was this primarily the steel industry then, or?
Well, it was all sorts of.
Okay.
I carried on the practice on behalf of employers, for the most part, and I represented the Coca-Cola franchises in Pittsburgh, Cleveland, and Buffalo. It was the same owner.
Okay.
And I represented an industry that was like King Soopers, with warehousing and individual stores. And the steel industry was represented by what we call the white shoe firm, the people that it would have been hard for me going to a night law school to have gotten into that firm.
Okay.
So then while I was practicing law as a labor relations attorney, I got a call from the chief judge at the United States District Court in Pittsburgh, and he said there was somebody who had come in and filed a lawsuit on a piece of yellow pad, and he was an African American who had applied for the apprenticeship program in the plumbing industry and been rejected. He had a job working for AT&T, and so he filed the suit on this piece of paper, and the judge said that he was asking me he thought that my labor relations practice would make it need a logical person to do that. This was based on a new law, the passed in 1964 to provide equal opportunity in employment. Well, I had to immerse myself in that new law because nobody in our county had ever been called upon to deal with it. And so I filed a class action lawsuit on behalf, there had never been a black member of this apprenticeship program in the whole history of, and so others had applied, some of them not seriously, but they'd applied and been rejected. And he said I wouldn't get paid for it. In the end, I did get some compensation because the plumbers union and the association of plumbing contractors, we made a settlement after some time, and it provided for some fee for me as well. Well, I became the go-to guy for class actions in civil rights cases. And so I handled a number of those, including on behalf of women. And
Do you think, I'm sorry to interrupt you, do you think getting involved in this had any ties to you growing up in your neighborhood that had African?
No.
Okay, okay.
When the judge called me, he had no idea where I grew up.
But I mean, as far as your own thoughts, did that
Yeah.
play, or did it, was it an issue?
It was a piece of work to be done.
Okay.
I felt that that blacks had been discriminated against, and but that was not the primary
Okay,
thing.
okay.
But I'm just reminded that before I was invited to get into this labor practice with this other man, I'd been asked by an author and writer for the Saturday Evening Post to look into the case of somebody who'd been in the state penitentiary for 18 years. And so he came, his name was John Bartlow Martin. He did the official biography of Adlai Stevenson. He was from Illinois, and he and I worked together on this case. This was a case of a man with a 59 IQ who pleaded guilty to some purse snatchings and an attempted rape, and was not represented by counsel. And it was on that basis that the case, I appealed it to the U.S. Supreme Court. In the meantime, I was invited to become an assistant district attorney, which I did for 2 years. So I handed that case over to a woman who had a lot of appellate experience. And in the 2 years in the district attorney's office, I did all the appellate work and a number of the trials. And I got good experience there. And then I went into the labor relations, and let's see, where was I going when I got distracted? I was doing this class action work and also arbitrating and also representing employers and industries that I could arbitrate because I was grandfathered. During the Carter administration, they ended the practice of lawyers representing either management or union and also arbitrating. But those of us who have been doing that were grandfathered into it, so I could keep doing it so long as I didn't do it in the same industry where I was representing them, employers. And so now our 2 children did very well in their lives. My son finished at the top of his class in one of the outstanding universities in the country, and my daughter was Phi Beta Kappa at Vassar and Mills. And my wife had been one of the rare women who went into chemistry and worked for DuPont and Hoffman LaRoche, and then changed professions and became a social worker. Went to the University of Chicago, became a social worker, and came to Pittsburgh as a social worker, which is where I met her. And so let's see. I'm trying to think of where I am in this narrative. At some point, our son, who had trained as an astronautical engineer, and he got into the working in the field, made a basic change in his profession, decided that he would accept a fellowship at Colorado State University to do a doctorate in and become a quantitative biologist working with animal populations. A far cry from aeronautical engineering, but nevertheless, the mathematics involved was similar. And our daughter ended up in California, in Berkeley, and so at some point, our son invited us to leave Pennsylvania and come to Fort Collins, where he could look after us in our old age.
Okay, so by this point you had already retired from...
I'd already retired,
Okay,
except that I kept working as a labor arbitrator, not as an advocate.
Okay.
And even after I came to Fort Collins, until about 2 years ago, I worked as a labor arbitrator. And since coming here, I've been to Alaska a few times, all over Colorado, and especially down at the federal prison in Florence, Colorado, Utah, and the most famous case I handled there was at Puget Sound in Washington State. And that was between the Navy and a group of 16 unions in the metallurgical trades. So, about 2 years ago, I came here about 10 years ago.
Okay.
And we arrived at Christmas time of 1998. And so we actually officially started being Colorado residents on January 1 of '99. And so that's only 9 years, isn't it? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Although it's about to become 10. Anyhow, I continued to arbitrate until 2 years ago when my hearing deteriorated. I wear hearing aids and I was getting through okay, but I just thought that as a matter of fairness, I ought not to be an essential part of a proceeding where people come from all across the country to testify, and if the judge in the case can't hear them, why, that would be a mess.
Yeah. So
I resigned from the panel of arbitrators 2 years ago. Now, at some point here recently, my wife and I divorced. We had gotten so, after 48 years of marriage, we had become different. We were friends. We have lunch every month or so, but we're both happier living apart. This didn't used to be a problem when people didn't live so long, but after coming here, my son introduced me to the computer, to the TiVo, to all sorts of technology, and each of my children has two children of their own. They're outstanding young people, and very happy to watch two of them growing up here. And we visit with the others in California, or they come here. I I moved into the Miramont Apartments 2.5 months ago. I'd been working out at the Miramont Athletic Club for 10 years, for the whole time I've been here. And I, after the divorce, I moved into the Worthington. And after 5 years at the Worthington, I decided that I could do better cooking for myself, or eating at restaurants, and have more space, and luckily was able to get this apartment with a view, and I just walk over every morning to work out, yeah. And I've got some friends there that we socialize, and I'm overwhelmed with reading material every day, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, as well as the Colorado, and come in, and
so you're keeping yourself busy.
I'm busy, and
yeah.
I have an on and off relationship with a lady friend. It's on at the moment, and I'm on the internet quite a bit, and I'm enjoying the current phase of my life better than any time.
Wonderful.
I'm not happy about the big drop in the stock market, but
who is?
You know, yeah. I think I'll survive that, and whatever gets passed on to the two children may be diminished from what they were expecting. But,
yeah.
So that's about the story.
Well, okay. If you don't mind, I want to back up again to your service. I think
sure.
I think it's very fascinating, and I think you brushed over it more than I'd like. So I'd like to dig a little bit deeper if I could. I guess let's talk a little bit about the OSS, which was the predecessor to the CIA. So
well, yes, the OSS ended with the war, and Harry Truman started the CIA. And I've read about the CIA, and somebody from the New York Times did a detailed study. CIA has been a disaster for most of its time. But the OSS got good grades. Not that I had anything to do with that, really, but it seems to have been highly regarded
yeah.
by people who studied it, but not the CIA.
Well, let's dive into what you did do. So you're into China. How did three Caucasians manage to stay out of the mainstream and go undetected by?
Well, yeah, we weren't undetected. The best that we could surmise was that whatever damage we were doing to the Japanese cause was not sufficient for them to send in somebody to go get us. And as long as we didn't become too obstreperous, why they just didn't bother with us.
Did you feel threatened? I mean, did you feel that you're?
You get used to the daily life and the activities that we carried on, and at that point we hadn't seen any Japanese, and we knew they weren't very far away. So it isn't a matter of living in fear every day. You just put that into the background. It's there, but you don't think about it.
I'll be darned. But the local Chinese population took care of you, and you were well received with them?
They didn't take care of us. They were too busy trying to preserve their own lives.
Okay.
There are no bathrooms around there.
Yeah.
You know, you can't drink the water, but they knew there were devils in the water. But if you make tea, somehow it gets transformed into doesn't hurt you. They didn't know what the process is that killed the germs, and you know, by boiling the water.
Yeah. Living in those conditions, did you ever succumb to any of the diseases, tropical diseases or anything like that?
I'm the one who got something. I thought it was dengue fever, but I've been told I've been told by some medical people that it couldn't have been. But what happened, I got this terrific fever, and we had a medical kit with us with instructions. And it seems to me that there was sulfathiazole, which they gave me, and the two of the other guys looked after me, and I came through it, but I could easily have died. So I don't know what I had, but it was almost certainly a mosquito-borne thing.
And so you're the three of you. Your job was kind of a central location to arrange for like sabotage
Well,
mission.
we moved around. We were in touch with our Chinese counterparts, and we gave them assignments, and they brought us information. They took our dirty tricks. For instance, if you picked up the equivalent of of Time magazine in Amoy, you might find some anti-Japanese stuff in there that we had gotten into it. Black intelligence, black propaganda,
Yeah.
and
So your job was more or less propaganda, or were you guys involved with sabotage and that kind of stuff, or was it more
well,
of more of
not directly, but
Right.
some of the things that the agents were able to do in Amway might possibly come under the heading of sabotage.
okay, okay. And how far? I mean, with the three of you, you were obviously disconnected from the American forces further east. How often were you away? Were you isolated this whole time, or would you ever get able to get back to?
No, we were isolated the whole time.
And how long approximately was that? Were you?
Well,
what were you
except for the trip over and the trip back the whole time. It was,
Oh, geez, huh?
yeah, about 10 months or 11 months.
Well, let's talk then about communications back home. As far as getting, I mean, a normal GI had a lot of his stuff censored when he would send a letter home. I mean, was there any communication between?
There was no mail.
Yeah.
There was nothing. I used to think about hamburgers, and but there was no contact. It was not possible to have. And I came away afterwards with the need for a great deal of dental work.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Because you don't get the proper food.
Right.
There were no cows that I saw. There were water buffalo, and they produce a kind of skim milk. It's and I was on a couple of occasions we were able to get ice cream, some homemade kind of ice cream. And once there was a little house, but with it was also a kind of a restaurant, store, house. It was all mixed together, and chickens running around on the dirt floor, and we indicated that we would like to eat some chicken. Well, they chop it up in bits that you can pick up with chopsticks. They don't have, a leg and a breast and so on. And so we ate that.
Was there a craving you had once you got home back to civilization? Was there one thing that you ran right
yeah,
for?
Hamburgers.
Hamburger? Yeah.
I don't eat hamburgers now, but at that time, one thing is after that year, and to this day, walking into a supermarket and seeing all that food displayed is a joyous experience.
Even to this day. Yeah.
Yeah, to this day.
Uh,
And,
what about communications out as well? You said you'd gotten word about the atomic bomb, but were you getting fed information on how the war was going and any idea where we stood on things?
Just in terms of our job.
Is that right?
Yeah.
But no word such as
What's going on in Europe?
Or Roosevelt's death or anything like that. You didn't.
Well, we learned of Roosevelt's death, but
what kind of effect did that have on you, particularly as being your first president you voted for?
Yeah. Well, I thought that was a major blow. I was very saddened by it. I'm a rather conservative fellow today, but back then he was hated by many, but he was loved by more. He was a remarkable president who was able to fulfill the need at the time, even though his background would not have indicated that. He was not thought of as a heavy thinker. But that, yeah, yes, I'm a news junkie. Are you?
Yeah.
And well, I didn't get fed my junkie needs during that period.
How about once again here? Here's a boy from Pittsburgh. Uh, you traveled a little bit to Baltimore and such, but now here you're in these exotic places all around the world. What was that experience like?
Well, the it was fascinating. I really enjoyed that. Particularly India and China. The smells were apparent. The smell in India became a different smell in China, and the worst one. You know, they spread human manure on their fields. I remember there were houseboats that some Chinese lived in. And I remember one where there was a woman who had just had her baby that she delivered by herself, and the afterbirth was in the water next to the boat. You know, and that was there were all sorts of things like that. An introduction to a whole new way of life, and to this day, I understand how that other part of the world lives. It's nothing. It's more closer to the way animals live than what we consider normal life.
Yeah. Have you ever had an opportunity after the war to travel back to any of the places that you were stationed or were at?
Well, not specifically that,
Yeah.
but I did a lot of traveling overseas. Italy became my favorite place. Now during my 52 prize-winning trip,
Uh-huh.
I didn't go to Italy, I went to Monaco, and a young English lady that I met there at the casino, and we got I got a picnic lunch put into a basket, and we went and looked at the Italian Alps from Monaco and had our lunch. But I went back to England. The place where I operated out of was a place called Henley-on-the-Thames. And I never got back to Henley-on-the-Thames. I did get back to London, but I was not stationed in London.
Right.
And at my wife's insistence, we went on a luxury cruise of Southeast Asia. And my thought was going back there in the way those people live. What kind of a vacation is that? But she had never been there and wanted to go. So, and this was a whole different way of life. It was on a luxury boat.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
I mean, if you had a little, they put the best scotch and so on. And if a little bit was gone, the next morning you'd have a new bottle. You know, and so. And we were in Thailand, and the place was called Burma, and became Myanmar.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
For a short while, we were able to get visas to go in there. Then they cut it off after that, but we went in there.
Wow. Wow. And what about this the ceremony when you got back to the States at Washington D.C.? It sounded like were you singled out? I mean, it sounded like a pretty special ceremony.
Yeah, it wasn't a ceremony, but it was an expedited procedure in special circumstances. The ambience at the Congressional Country Club was a little better than some barracks somewhere.
Right. Yeah.
You know, it was a way, without announcing it, of saying, well, we appreciate you took greater risk than most.
Okay.
Actually, I never heard of a shot fired in anger. You know, there were some guys that they lived in, you know, some guy in more dangerous conditions than I did. But once you get into this activity, you don't know where you're going to end up being or what you're going to have to do. So of all the places in the world, China would have been the last place that I would have expected
Yeah.
to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Throughout the years, have you ever kept in touch or had any reunions with the two guys you were
Yeah.
stationed with, or a general OSS type of reunion, or?
There was an OSS type of Pittsburgh OSS people. Uh, the the Mellon family, yeah, the Mellons and the Hineses, and before them the Carnegies were the big names of it. Well, Scaife is connected. The Mellons and Scaifes intermarried, and they were almost like one family. And so one of the Scaifes was in OSS in Washington, at a desk job. And he organized an OSS veterans. I have a little pin with OSS on it. And we met for a while, and you get the combination of aristocratic Scaifes and somebody with a Yugoslavian name who would not have been given entree into the country club of the Mellons.
Right.
We all ended up in the same place, and it didn't last. But with respect to the other two guys in Team Reptile, Jim Carr, who was from Elizabeth, New Jersey, ended up in the South. I think it was Atlanta. Married, and we kept in touch. And Skip, who was from Illinois, he married, and he visited me in Pennsylvania, and I knew Skip had developed an alcohol problem, and at some point I stopped hearing from him, and I don't know what's become of him. And Jim Carr died, and his wife wrote to me, and I sent her a piece I wrote about that walk into Amoy that her husband had promoted, and so that's about it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we'll start to wind down this interview then. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you wanted to talk about, or any stories that you're coming up with now that you'd like to kind of make sure that we've covered pretty much everything?
Well, I'm looking through your list of things, and I think I've covered most things.
Well, I guess one last question that I always like to ask is, how did that period of time affect your life, change your life, play into the role in your life, or did it, or was it just simply a segment of your life?
I understand the questions, and I would say, looking back over it, that nothing in my military service equaled winning that essay contest as a turning point in my life. There may be nuances or rather subtle things that got into my life that I'm scarcely aware of consciously, but the impact of living in the third world for a year gave me an understanding of what of the great advantage of living in the United States, aside from the material aspects of it as well. There are other things that these people don't enjoy. That,
Right.
So
I guess what I find intriguing is you said that trip of 52 was a turning point and it gave you confidence to go on to law school. I would think I would find, as I hear your story, your experience in China and stuff, you don't felt like you had developed confidence. I mean, it seemed like it would take an incredible amount of confidence and self-reliance to survive that. But
I didn't consciously think of it that
No.
way, but I think that there's truth to that. Uh, and I guess it helped me to appreciate life more.
okay.
When we could have been snuffed out in a moment, or the disease that I was able to
Sure.
fight off, you know, it's not a sanitary way of life. I once in China encountered a group of upper class Chinese women, and they frequently would, in a restaurant, they would spit on the floor.
Yeah.
I mean, and we're not talking about the peasants now. We're talking about some upper class women, but that was part of their culture that it was okay to do that.
Right. Right.
So, I think that I've been privileged to live an interesting life. It was not always an easy one, but it's been interesting.
Okay.
And I just terrifically proud of my children and grandchildren, and you know I don't know what else I could have wished for.
Very good. Well, Martin, I want to thank you for sitting down to tell your story today. More importantly, though, I want to thank you for your service to our country.
You want to what?
Thank you for your service to our country.
Oh, well, thank you.